With the Australian property market going up so much in the last 5 years, there's literally tens of thousands of Australians sitting on massive amounts of equity in either their own homes or their investment properties. Which is why in this video, we wanted to talk about what is equity, how you can use equity to buy an investment property, and what are the positives and negatives of using equity for your next purchase. When I started out as an investor at 24, it wasn't even until I bought my third investment property that I knew what equity was. So what is equity?
To keep it really simple, equity is essentially the difference between the current market value of a property and any loans remaining against that property. So let's say, for example, you have a property that's worth $1 million and a loan remaining of $500,000. Essentially, there's $500,000 worth of equity in that property.
So one option when we're going out there to buy the next property is obviously to put down a cash deposit, but the other option is the equity that you just talked about. So can you use that equity to go buy that new investment property?
Now, it's not always a simple yes or no answer as to whether or not you can actually use that equity, because it's a job of a mortgage broker or a bank manager to determine whether or not you're in a financial position to actually use that equity as a deposit for a new property purchase, or whether you'll have to use a cash deposit. Now, we know thousands of people that have actually used the equity in their properties as a down payment for their next investment property. So long as you're in a good financial position and the banks are willing to offer you a new loan, then absolutely you can use that equity as a deposit.
So let's say you've got equity and you're in a position where the banks are happy to lend you some money. What's an example in the real world right now of equity working for somebody on a property?
You know, for today, I'll use a real world example of one of our clients, Sam, who bought a property back in 2021 for about $500,000 in Brisbane. Now, fortunately, Sam chose the right market, the right suburb, the right property. And in 2025, that property got valued at $700,000. Now, back in 2021, when Sam bought the property, he put down a $100,000 deposit. So he only had $400,000 of debt. And now the property is worth $700,000. So essentially, there's $300,000 of equity in the property.
So you mentioned off camera this idea of usable equity. Just because Sam has 300K of equity sitting in the property doesn't mean he can take all of that out. What did you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, even though the property's got $400,000 worth of debt and it's worth $700,000, the banks won't release that whole $300,000. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending who you ask, they'll only release up to 80% of the property's value. So if it's $700,000 property, 80% of that is $560,000, meaning the difference there is $160,000 worth of usable equity. Now, obviously, Sam was in a financial position. He was earning enough money where he could service the new debt on top of that. But I think a lot of people get that wrong, thinking that they can use the whole $300,000, where that's incorrect. You can only use up to 80% of the property's value. Now, what I might add is there is riskier lending options. If you want to go into that LMI, that lender's mortgage insurance territory, they may allow you to release a little bit more, but typically there is some negatives that come off the back of that as well.
So obviously with anything, there's positives and negatives, there's risk and reward, and there's your personal financial position, which you can talk to your accountant about, your financial advisor about, or your mentors or coaches about. But in this example of using equity, what are some of the positives associated with this strategy?
I'd say the major benefit is just not having to save that cash. You know, everyone knows how hard it can be to save up that cash, especially as you do collect more debt and as your cost of living goes up over time. On top of that, it does allow you to accumulate investment properties a lot faster than if you were having to save those cash deposits, because what we've seen, at least over the last 5 years in Australia, is the capital growth rates have massively exceeded the average Australian savings rates. So it gives you that capacity to scale your property portfolio a little bit faster. And one of the other positives is just using leverage. You know, that's one of the biggest benefits of property investing, is being able to put down, in this case, no cash, and being able to go out there and buy another investment property that will be exposed to capital growth. So I really like that as an option for people who can't save those cash deposits.
But obviously with everything in life, if there's a positive, there's also a counterbalance in the negative. So what are some of the negatives about using equity to buy an investment property?
Well, I think first thing that's a negative about using equity is you can't always use it. You might not be in a financial position to service the additional debt. So you could have a property with millions of dollars worth of equity, but not be able to use it. You know, our mum has experienced this in the past, where she was in a very asset rich position, but not very cash rich. And she wanted to release some equity to do some renovations on her investment property and build a granny flat. But the banks just said, absolutely not, because your income position isn't strong enough. So I think the biggest negative is the fact that it can be there, but you can't access it. But on top of that, some of the obvious ones is you're in an increased debt position, and holding debt never feels good. I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely loathe holding debt. I just understand that it's a necessary evil, especially at this stage of my life. So having that increased debt means increased expenses, increased interest repayments. If those fluctuating interest rates go up, it can be really challenging to hold that additional debt as well. So you just need to be really careful and surround yourself with the right team of advisors that are keeping you safe on your investment journey. And what a lot of people don't take into account when they are 100% financing the purchase of an investment property is your holding costs are going to be significantly higher. When we run our cash flow analysis for our clients when they're about to buy an investment property, when we look at a property with a 20% deposit versus a property with 100% debt, meaning that they've used equity for that next investment property purchase, your holding costs are going to be significantly higher if you're using 100% leverage. Now, one of the biggest risks when buying with equity is if you are 100% leveraged, it works really good when the property market is going up and that property is increasing in value, but we've seen periods in the past where property values do go down. And I heard so many stories back in the mid 2010s when the mining boom ended and some of those regional mining towns absolutely crashed. There was a lot of people that used equity to buy those properties, and then let's say they went out there and bought a property in Gladstone for $600,000 using 100% finance, meaning that there's a $600,000 debt position. Then the property market crashes, that property becomes worth $400,000, but they've still got $600,000 worth of debt on it. So you need to be really cautious and careful as to how you use equity and where you should be investing, obviously following those fundamentals, trying to time your investments to the best of your ability so you can avoid some of those downfalls. But at the end of the day, nobody can predict the future, so just be really careful with equity.
I think that's a really important point. Whether you're using equity or cash for your next deposit, for your next investment, like making sure you follow the history and the fundamentals of the market that have worked for our parents and our grandparents and the great-grandparents out there. So what are some of these fundamentals that have historically worked in Australia to outperform the market averages over the longer term?
Thanks to the likes of CoreLogic and the Australian Bureau of Statistics, we've got decades of history to look back at to see what's worked and what's failed. Now, what's historically worked is buying houses or townhouses in your major metro markets or major regional markets and buying as close to the city or as close to the water that you can financially afford. It's always good to be in those areas where you've got a rising population and an imbalance between supply and demand, where you've got good employment opportunities, great access to education and healthcare, things that are going to attract more people to that region. And obviously you want those people to be able to gain access to good jobs so they can pay for their mortgages or pay for the rent. Now, for me as an investor, these are the fundamentals that I'll always follow.
G'day guys, my name's Ben and I'm the director here at Pumped on Property, and I just want to say a massive thank you for watching our content today. Now, if you're thinking about buying an investment property in the next 3 to 12 months, then the team and I would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. In that session, we can talk about exactly where you are right now, where you'd like to be longer term, and we can deeply educate you on the Australian market. And then you can take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially become one of the small number of clients that we work with each week. To book your session, all you have to do is go to www.pumpedonproperty.com and click that book your free strategy session button. But either way, we wish you all the best on your journey as an investor to financial freedom.